When a woman walks into my practice and has PCOS, I want to get her hormones in balance and cycling and regulated as quickly as possible. Now, that sounds very straightforward and easy, like, hey, just get the hormones to have a good feedback loop and cycle. But the thing is that, like we mentioned, this is a whole body multi-system issue. And so that's highly dependent on a couple of other really important body systems, namely our liver and detox system.
Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 34 of the Healthy Skin Show. Today, we are going to talk a bunch about acne, the diet changes that can help with acne, as well as its relationship with PCOS. We've talked about this a little bit before, but we're going to delve deeper into it today. And because the conversation was so full of information and obviously then went a little bit longer than our normal interviews do, I want to make sure to dive into things quickly so that way we can finish up on time. And you guys know that I love all of the feedback you've been sharing over on iTunes and all the other podcasting platforms out there that you might be listening to this podcast on. And I just want to highlight one particular listener today. Her name is Kath98205, and she shared that the podcast is excellent work. That Jennifer is extraordinarily generous and thoughtful in what she shares with her audience, mostly because she is so personally experienced in the difficulties they share. Her empathy and professionalism make the Healthy Skin Show an invaluable resource for those suffering from bad skin problems. Thanks to her. Kath, I am so appreciative that you took the time to share that. And I'm also glad to know that the level of commitment that I have in sharing with you guys everything that not just I've experienced and I know, but the context that I have to get these guests here and in front of you guys to provide you with the best content possible, it shows through. And it really just means a lot because I don't want a single person to continue suffering. And it's my hope that this podcast will be a growing community where we can find ways together to support one another toward that state of rebuilding healthier skin, getting back to a much more normal state of life, where you don't have to constantly be afraid that your skin's going to flare or that you've got this like crazy itch that keeps you up all night and all the other symptoms and frustrations that come along with it. So with that said, let's dive into today's interview.
All right, we are back again. This is part 2 with my dear friend, Brie Wieselman. If you guys did not check out part 1 of this conversation where we talk about adult acne and its connection to PCOS, which underlies it. So the acne is actually a symptom of it, this greater problem. Go back and listen to that first because we're going to break that down, the symptoms and the testing and what that looks like so you can identify if maybe that's really what's going on for you. Otherwise, we are going to dive in a little bit deeper today. So if you do not recall, let me just remind you, Brie is a digestive health and hormone balance specialist. She works with women all over the world in her online practice. Besides women's health, she specializes in helping people with digestive problems such as IBS, parasitic infections, candida overgrowth, and SIBO to rebuild a bulletproof microbiome. Using her programs that integrate functional and Chinese medicine approaches, she has worked with hundreds of clients living all around the world, empowering them with a personalized roadmap for understanding and transforming their health. Brie, I'm glad to have you back. This is great. We get part 2.
Oh, I feel so honored. I get to have a part 2. Thanks for having me back.
Wait, you know
so much
what?
Fun.
I feel like this conversation is so deep. We wouldn't do it justice if I was like, okay, we're at time. We just need to cut it off. Like,
Yeah.
Frankly, if I was dealing with this, I would be like, okay, well, what's the next step? What can I do? Because if I go to my doctor, like you said, they're probably just going to put me on birth control pills. And that might not be something I'm comfortable with. And you know what? For anybody out there who's not quite comfortable with that, you should do your research and understand why. You might have good cause for concern, aside from the fact that it increases your risk of stroke. And I have actually known 3 women who've had strokes because of birth control pills. So and there's other things that go on as well. So we're not going to go into that today, but I think it's important for you to know a lot of times with a conventional doctor, they just don't know all the other options. And I think that's why this is a worthwhile conversation to have, because the truth is you want to get rid of your acne. And I totally and completely understand that. But the acne is not actually the problem. It's the pretty carrot dangling in front of you that you like, oh, I got to get that carrot. But in actuality, the real problem is this underlying hormonal imbalance issue that is triggering the skin, so to speak, to end up in the way that it's presenting itself. So, all right, you've got the tests done. You have confirmation that you've got PCOS. What can you do about it?
Absolutely. So yeah, let's talk about this and break it down a little bit, because there's some things we can do today at home just with our choices with diet and lifestyle, maybe even some personal supplementation. There's some really key pieces about diet I can't wait to share. And then we can talk a little bit about like, what do we do? What do I do when someone, in a clinical setting, when I'm working with someone, just so someone can get a little peek into what that might look like. So, okay, always we're going to start with diet. So for PCOS, and especially with all acne, actually, you want to balance your blood sugar and insulin. And you want those to have really optimal function. So this goes if you're in the category of like tending towards being overweight or struggling to keep your weight down, or even if you're underweight, even the underweight types will show some signs of insulin resistance. And even if it's not a whole body insulin resistance, it's basically like insulin resistance of the ovary. So step one would be to optimize your carbohydrate intake for you. And I'm not going to throw out a number and say it should be like below these grams or between these number of grams, because I don't believe in that. It has to do with how your body works with the carbs. And that depends a lot on your genetics. It depends on your level of activity, your age. There's a lot of things that will influence that. So what I recommend people do is play with that and look for signs of either, hypoglycemia, or even do some blood glucose testing.
So go to buy a home test from like
home glucose meter,
Target,
yeah,
CVS, whatever, with the strips and start testing.
Exactly.
And do you have any suggestions like of how they at all, like any suggestions of how you should test your blood sugar with that if they decide to do it?
I have a handout that if anyone wants to email me through the website, I'll be happy to send it to them.
Oh,
It guides
awesome.
them through it. Absolutely. I didn't even think about that. But basically, we don't ever want the blood sugar to rise over 140 within 2 hours after eating a meal. And ideally, we even want it to kind of maintain a lot tighter control than that. But we also don't want it to get super low. Like usually if it goes much below 65, 70, then I'm going to maybe get concerned also. So that would be a whole long discussion. But essentially, we don't want there to be wild fluctuations, and we don't want our blood glucose to trend high. In general, we're going to try to eat probably slightly on the lower carb side of things. And really, it's about the choice of what kind of carbs. So eating more whole food, or what we call cellular carbs, not avoiding flours, sugars, processed sugar, like that.
So if you're eating a lot of takeout and you love your pasta, like me, because I'm Italian, and bread and all sorts of stuffs. And we're not even talking about like specific food issues right now. We got a good one coming up for you, so stay tuned. But Brie is going to dish on. I was like, what? We need to talk about that. I think that one of the biggest pieces for people is they think it doesn't really matter if they have, I'm going to have cereal for breakfast. That's probably not the best thing to have for breakfast, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You're definitely going to be better off doing more balanced meals where you're focusing on getting a whole bunch of vegetables, like 2 cups of vegetables per meal, ideally. And your plate is mostly vegetables, and then maybe a palm-sized serving of protein of any kind, and then a tablespoon or 2 of really healthy fats. For a lot of people, that's a good place to start. Optimizing diet can be highly personal, and there's a lot of talk about different things, keto and all that. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, because that actually could be beneficial for some people in this situation, but not for everybody. So I think that generally focusing on eating whole foods, getting your carbs from root vegetables, squashes, fruits and vegetables, and possibly properly prepared legumes, and occasionally whole grains in certain people. And it all depends on your individual tolerance. So that would be the first step. And then the other thing about our carb tolerance is we got to move. So I don't care what you do, make sure you love it so you'll keep doing it. So if it's hiking and getting out into nature, if you love going for a swim or a bike ride, if you're a dancer like me, if you're really into hitting the gym and doing like HIIT training, that's great too. And everybody should be doing some kind of strength or resistance training in addition to those things. But we just got to get moving. Even just going for a 20-minute walk after dinner increases your insulin sensitivity. So that's the best possible thing that almost everybody can do.
And it's free. It's free.
And it's
I'm going to
free.
say that it's free. Like a lot of times people think you got to pay for all this stuff. There are really important lifestyle things that are free that can actually make a difference. So let us underscore that. I think it's important. I think going out for walks and moving is such a critical piece. And if you love yoga, just throw your mat out on the carpet and do like 20 minutes of a vinyasa. It doesn't have to look pretty. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's plenty of things that you can do. We all can find something that we can fit into our lives to get moving.
Absolutely. There's actually this little app that I recently started to love. I think it's free, but it's like the 7-minute workout. And I'm sure I'm probably the last person to know about this. It seems like one of those things everyone knows about, but it's basically a 7-minute workout you can do anywhere. And you go at your own like level of fitness. And it's like, some like wall sits and some squats and some like planks and, your basic exercises, nothing too fancy, but you get it done in 7 minutes. So even if it's a day where I can't do anything else, I have 7 minutes. Like if you don't have 7 minutes,
I know
something's wrong and we have to have a different conversation.
So you should tell me what that app is. We'll put it in the show notes. And then my app that I downloaded, we're both looking at our phones. We're like, what is it on the phones? So I downloaded this app called 8Fit. It's the number 8 and then FIT. So it's free. They have a membership thing you can subscribe to. I just use the free thing. It works. Like you don't need any weights. You don't need any supplies. You can swap the exercises out and do it at your own pace. I like it.
I love that stuff. That's like a great use of technology.
Exactly.
I'm all for get off your phone, but I like that app too.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. So say we've done these things. We worked on the nutrition, we got moving, and we're still having a hard time with our insulin sensitivity or you're trending insulin resistant. Maybe your doctor has said that. That's a time when we're going to probably add in some therapeutic nutrients. So some of the ones that I'll throw out there that are pretty safe for people to use are things like inositol, which is in the B vitamin family, D-pinitol, which is actually a version of inositol that's highly absorbable and really, really one of the best things you can take if you have PCOS to increase your regular ovulation and your blood sugar insulin sensitivity. And then things like curcumin and possibly chromium. In certain cases, berberine, but I like to reserve that with a little caution just because it has effects on the microbiome too. But those are some of the natural substances that could be used.
Yeah. And I just want to say, if anybody's like, I don't know what she said, I don't know what those are, we're going to put them in the show notes so you know how to spell them. Because we both know what they are, but we also recognize that if you're not a nutritionist or a practitioner, a lot of times some of these names are tricky to spell, and we prefer you actually find what we're talking about. So they'll be in the show notes. And then also too, I just want to say, part of the thing with berberine, like don't go out and just take that. That's literally like Mother Nature's version of metformin. So if you take too much, it can cause blood sugar drops. And
that one is, use it with a
You should work with someone. Yeah.
Yeah. I mention it because it's a tool, but no, I agree with you. I don't think people should just go out and take it. Okay, so in the food realm, I really want to talk about, there's this one food that is like, it's got to go in this situation. Like if you have acne, period, if you have acne and PCOS, definitely this has to go. And this part, I will just put out a little warning. I'm going to mention some words that are hormones. I'm going to explain what they are, but it is going to get a little techie. So if you're not interested, that's okay. Just, go forward a minute or two. But basically, the biggest food that's a no-no in this condition until it's under control and even possibly long-term is dairy. Now, here's why. So dairy, there's a hormone in milk that's called insulin-like growth factor 1. So we call this IGF-1 for short because that's a mouthful. And that hormone mimics insulin in the body. And it makes sense that it's there because it's a growth hormone. And growth hormones increase body mass. So if you're a baby cow, that makes sense because you want to become a big cow. But it's a problem for both PCOS and acne because women who have PCOS tend to have higher insulin levels or less sensitivity to their insulin. So we want to do everything we can to keep our insulin levels low. Now, in the skin, that hormone, IGF-1, it increases our production of sebum, and it simultaneously makes you grow more new skin cells faster. And it's because it's a growth hormone. So as the new cells grow, the old ones die. And so that can mean there's more dead skin cells that can theoretically block the pores. And then you have the sebum trapped under it. And boom, perfect storm for acne. Now, the last couple of pieces is in the woman with PCOS, IGF-1 causes your ovaries to also release too much testosterone, something we're also trying to minimize. And that testosterone will promote acne.
Ooh, this is just a bad storm on both sides. It's just bad.
It really is. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. So normally people have a binding protein for clearing this and making it inactive and getting that IGF-1 out of the body. But women with PCOS don't have as much of that binding protein. So when we eat dairy, there's just more of it floating around. And so it's just it's like this perfect storm. Now, it's interesting because you just mentioned metformin, and metformin is a common drug that's used for diabetes or pre-diabetes. And it's actually also prescribed in PCOS to help women ovulate, even without overt insulin resistance. It'll still do that. And so interestingly, one of the ways the drug metformin works in women with PCOS is by helping to balance the ratio between IGF-1 and binding protein. So take home message with all of that science is that we want to do everything we can to keep our IGF-1 low and to keep our insulin low. And dairy is going to be the biggest dietary source that was going to promote that hormone and go the opposite direction where we want to go. So a lot of my people say, okay, well, is it just cow dairy or,
I was going to ask you this. I'm like, okay, let's define dairy because I guarantee you somebody's going to go, well, does that include eggs? Because they're in the dairy section. And that's a good question. Right. A lot of people have asked me that. The answer would be no, it does not include eggs. So what would you define as dairy?
Yeah. So this is only milk that came out of mammals. So goat, sheep milk, and camel milk all do have this hormone. Anything that's basically milk produced by a mama that is going to a little baby to make them grow bigger is going to have it. But things like grass-fed butter or ghee are mostly okay because those are a fat, and this IGF-1, that's a protein. So it's going to be bound to the protein part of the milk. So really what we're talking about is like the dairy fat should be okay. So, I mean, I'm not somebody who just in general in my practice, I don't like to like wholesale remove foods because I'm like you. I come from a food family. I love to eat. Like food gives me a lot of joy. We could talk about that for days. But I don't think that this means like, okay, it's not an allergy. Like it's not like I can never touch dairy again. It's just kind of taking this into perspective like, okay, maybe I'm going to have a bite of that cheese, but I'm not going to have cheese every day. Or I'm not going to like drink milk every day or have milk in my tea or coffee or whatever it is I'm having, So it's just kind of modifying our total intake of those things.
I think that's a really important perspective because a lot of times people become so afraid, then they're like, well, I don't know if there's butter in this. I don't know if they put this in this. And they're freaking out because they don't know how something was made or the right questions to ask. And it's important to have a common sense approach, especially because you're right, this is not a food allergy. And it's who's to say that if, say, in a number of months or a year or something like that, you get your health in a better spot, then maybe you have more leeway. And I found that with clients, even when they have a food sensitivity, typically the exception is when you have like high sensitivities, moderate sensitivities, or gluten. Those usually, you don't always get to enjoy those again. But I think in this case, because that's the point here. If you guys are like, IGF-1 sounds so like sciencey, the thing is there is science behind this. So when you're sitting there going, well, it's maybe that's like a woo-woo thing. A lot of doctors will be like, they'll blow us off. And the things that we say is like, oh, it's woo-woo, that's nonsense. But there's actual science behind this. These are scientific reasons for why these specific things. And by the way, taking dairy out, free. That's another free thing you can do. So Brie, when people come to you, when clients and women with this problem come to you, it sounds to me, so will help to recap this here. It sounds like the first thing you're going to say is, all right, we've got to manage the carbs. We've got to be responsible with that. And hey, there's a lot of resources out there on how to meal plan. If you need help with that, we can put a link in the show notes because you don't have to figure it all out on your own in this day and age. But then too, you've got to move. You've got to make time to do that, even if it means you do it at home or you get to the gym or you join a intramural league of some sort. You just do something a number of times a week. I like to shoot for like 3 to 4, but you know. And then it also sounds like you got to break up with dairy for a while. The milk, you're just not friends.
At least for the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they've done those things, let's say this is somebody's listening to this and they're like, I have PCOS. I watch my carbs. I know what I can tolerate. I've used the glucose meter. If anyone doesn't know about that, listen to part 1. Let's give them some good directions of what to do next, because I have a feeling when they go to the gynecologist or the dermatologist, they're not going to have the greatest of suggestions. So what should somebody look for if they're like, hey, you know what? I want to find the underlying reasons for what's going on here. I want to address them appropriately and move. I don't want this whole thing to consume the rest of my adult life. I'd like to move forward. What's the best thing for somebody in that boat to do?
Absolutely. Well, okay. Speaking from an experience, and I wish I had done this, and this is part of why I help people with this condition, because I just want to save them the tears and frustration and time and money that it took me to figure it out on my own. So basically, I would definitely recommend that these are the pieces where you probably want to work with somebody who practices functional medicine and who has a good background in hormones and microbiome. And here's why. From the 30,000 foot view, when a woman walks into my practice and has PCOS, I want to get her hormones in balance and cycling and regulated as quickly as possible. Now, that sounds very straightforward and easy, like, hey, just get the hormones to have a good feedback loop and cycle. But the thing is that, like we mentioned, this is a whole body multi-system issue. And so that's highly dependent on a couple of other really important body systems, namely our liver and detox system. So how well is our detox working? And then our microbiome, who is living in our gut, and are they helping us or hurting us? And then also, of course, looking directly at the hormones and maybe using things to help regulate hormones. So I'll talk just briefly about why are these important. So the reason they're important is that we make hormones in our ovaries primarily, but other places in the body, but we're talking about reproductive hormones. So we make these hormones and then they go into our bloodstream and they circulate through the body and do their job. They act on different tissues. And then they go to the liver to be broken down once they're not new and fresh. And then they are dumped from the liver into our intestines to clear, and the urine actually also clear through the kidneys and clear with the bowel movement. And that's how they leave the body. And that's in an ideal world. And then we make new fresh ones and those go into circulation and everything's happy. But if you have liver detox that's kind of backed up or traffic jammed, that's not going to happen as efficiently. And we're not going to break down those hormones, leaving room for fresh new ones. So that's something I'm always checking in to see if a person has signs of, overburden to detox. And then the other thing is what's going on with their gut? How's their gut health? So what happens is that both for hormone health and for lowering overall inflammation, we need to have a good, strong, healthy microbiome with as much diversity as possible. Diversity is strength everywhere in the gut, in the world, in politics. So what I do is I wind up testing people's guts for infections and also looking for imbalances in their good bacteria too. So I'll see a lot of things like infections such as H. pylori or Candida is a big one with acne, bacteria like staph and strep, or also there's a huge connection between SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and acne. So any of those, you could have any of those going on, and those can basically do two things. One is that they create a bunch of toxins. We call these endotoxins, and those are inflammatory, and our connective tissue is especially sensitive, and the skin is a connective tissue. So that can promote acne. And then also, we have to have tons of good gut flora because they're our main player in regulating our hormones, especially estrogen levels. And if you remember back in part 1, I mentioned that women with PCOS tend to build up excess estrogen and they don't have enough progesterone to balance it. So we want everything working to clear our estrogen and keep us in a happy, healthy range. So we need to have the right bacteria so that we don't recirculate our estrogen. So again, liver, I look at the liver, I look at the gut. And then last but not least, I would work with the hormones to promote ovulation and proper signaling. And so sometimes we'll use things to help clear excess estrogen. And, even at home, that's like putting ground flaxseed in your smoothie. Sometimes there's a lot of other herbs that can come into play. And one that's a really common herb that people may have heard of is called Vitex or chaste tree berry. that herb in certain people can be really, really helpful. So in one study of about 120 women, they had 4 different types of acne, and they took chaste tree berry or Vitex for 1 to 2 years. And by 3 months, 70% of the women were free from acne just from that step, like without.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It's huge. There's very few things in the world that are that effective. And that's a pretty safe one for people. That's a herb that's been used in just folk medicine for, millennia. So it's not something that people can mess themselves up too bad with. So anyway, those are some of the steps that I'll look at kind of clinically with testing.
Like I said, this is important. If you're going to be serious about it, you cannot go, okay, we're talking hormones. You got to work with a practitioner that is trained in hormones. I cannot stress that anymore. And not like training, like I did an online course. No, you got to work with somebody that really has a lot of schooling, because if you're messing around with hormone pathways and all these other more complicated areas, you got to work with somebody that really knows what they are doing, because everything affects something else. And when you start to mess with different things, especially these critical hormones, it can cause other issues. So that's why I say this with love and care. Find someone like Brie is an amazing person. She's got a private practice and she sees clients. You see clients virtually, correct?
I do. Yeah. I work with people by video consult.
Yeah. So there you go. Doesn't matter where you live. You can see Brie.
Yeah.
Well, Brie, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to put all of your links below. And you've got that free hormone quiz. We'll put a link to that. So if anybody's interested in seeing what their hormone balance is like, especially if you're dealing with all sorts of skin issues. So again, hormone issues can show up on the skin in a myriad of ways. Doesn't just have to be acne, but that's what we're talking about today. Brie, thank you so much. I promise you guys we're going to have Brie back. Brie and I were brainstorming on other ideas. Brie's going to be back, but thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Jen, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
I just love the wealth of knowledge that Brie brings to the conversation. She's just so good with hormones. She understands them and understands the complexity that comes along with them. With that said, if you haven't tuned in to Brie's initial interview, you can check it out in episode number 13 of the Healthy Skin Show. With that said, I'd love to hear from you guys. If you have any other additional tips that have worked for you as far as dealing with adult acne, leave them on today's episode in the comment section. And of course, all of the things we discuss will be in the show notes. And with that said, make sure to share this with somebody who could use this information and could use a little bit of inspiration today. And of course, I will see you in the next episode.